probably, I know initially I was talking about discussing some biohacking stuff, but I'll probably actually may do more of that in the March one, where I can go through a bunch of biohacking. You hear the term biohacking a lot now, but this way I'll just talk about a few things, and we can actually just have some question and answer if you want. We'll make it real simple. You know, I love taking people from through a complete paradigm shift when it comes to health and wellness. Like if we have a patient that is a pharmaceutical rep selling a drug, and they come in for back pain, and we watch them over a few months flip completely to the point where they get out of the industry because they can't even tolerate it anymore, because their whole perspective on health and wellness has changed. That's kind of fun. But when we do talks like this, we know that if someone's coming on a Tuesday night at 6:30, they probably are already wellness oriented.
Interested.
Yeah, they already have a pretty good idea. So, but the biggest problem out there right now is that people don't have the right definition of wellness. They tend to think of wellness as weight loss or being fit or even not having pain. But for me, it was always about having kind of an optimal life, meaning, because we know a lot of people that are fit, but maybe they have depression, or they're unhappy, or they have a lot of money, but their marriage is miserable, or they're super active in their church and spiritually strong, but they have no money. You know, so I always thought there was a way you could probably have it all, and that for me was wellness, because you could be in shape, but if your relationships aren't very good, it really doesn't matter. The best analogy I've come up with is spinning plates, and where if you've ever seen people spinning plates, and I remember watching That's Incredible when I was little, and they set a record with how many plates they could spin at one time. And what happens is when you get a plate going, you've got to get it going, and then you get another one going, and then another one. So you get your plates going, but they don't keep going. You have to kind of keep touching them up to keep them going. And as they slow down, they'll start to wobble, and if you don't give it enough attention, eventually it'll crash. And so the way I looked at it was each area of my life was a plate, and any plate, like whether it was starting my practice or getting married and starting a family, they all took some effort to get going, but then you've got to keep touching off. Now the key is, one, you can have too many plates, so that's number one, but two, it's constantly touching those up. And there's going to be times where they'll wobble, and that's okay, but you've got to, like in school, I don't know if you remember, they would say, study every subject a little bit every day. That would be a key to being successful in school, and no one ever does that. Well, when I got into doctorate program, the first semester, I decided I was going to test that theory, and I didn't have a TV, and I lived by myself, and I said, I'm going to study every subject, at least a little bit, every single day, and I'm not going to study for a test on the day of a test. And I was going to be prepared before that, and it was unbelievable, because it worked. I got a 4.0 that time. It was the only 4.0 I ever got. But it worked. So same thing with life, where you don't wait till things crash before you give them attention. I used to do a talk, and I did a talk, and I actually learned how to spin plates. And I set it up, and I spun the plates. And I got a lot of great feedback from it. Well, one of the problems was everybody wanted to come to, they wanted me to do these corporate talks for them. And and they would, I'm like, I'm not doing that spinning plate thing anymore. It kind of was like a circus act, I felt like. But they would always call back and be like, hey, you're bringing the plates, right? Because I wanted to make the point that if you get these things going, but you had to have a balance, and you had to touch on that at all times. So anyway, so wellness for me is more than just being in shape or eating well or exercise. It was about trying to have that whole balance. And that's where today in medicine, the definition is not, basically the definition is pain or no pain, or sickness or no sickness. And the definition of health in Dorland's Medical Dictionary is optimal health and wellness, or optimal wellness, not just the absence of disease and infirmity. And the problem is right now, if you go to the doctor and they say, how do you feel? And it's all based on how you feel. And if you feel good, you're healthy, and if you have symptoms, you're not. But it all comes down to how do we alleviate your symptoms, and it comes down to medicine. And we're not anti-medicine by any means, but it's a system that's broken, and we could talk about the statistics and how sickly even the kids are. I know a lot of people talk about the rates of disease going up, and that it's because we're living longer. Well, the fastest rising group of chronically ill humans right now is kids. That's the fastest growing is in the younger population. So it's not that we're growing older, it's just even our kids are getting sicker. So something basically has to change. I had a conversation today with somebody, and they said, I just wish the doctors did more with wellness. And I said, you know what, that's really not that's not what they do. So it's almost like you have an electrician and you have a plumber. It's like asking the electrician to do the plumbing. They're two different things. So a doctor, we need our healthcare system for broken bones and stitches and emergency procedures, and we do really, really well with that. But when it comes to health and wellness, they're just not trained in it. It's not something that they just do it so poorly. So you almost have to look outside the medical system, and that's what a lot of people are doing now. They're searching. You mentioned that website. The subscription base is booming because people are desperate for information. They want something that makes sense to them. They're kind of, when I started in practice over 20 years ago, people would come in and I still had to kind of explain that, they'd say, I get headaches, but Tylenol takes them away. And I would have to explain, that Tylenol really doesn't fix the problem, it just masks it. And now people come in and they just say, I don't want medicine. I don't want to go to the doctor. So there's definitely a wellness kind of revolution happening right now. I guess one of the problems though is you hear one expert say one thing and another, PhD, MD say complete opposite. So you've got these highly educated people saying complete opposite things. So, and I always talk about it in most of the things I talk about, but for me, what I wanted to do is, anytime I've ever wanted to do something, I try to find somebody who did it the best, and then I wanted to pick their brain, find out what they did, and model those people. I used to water ski actually at SeaWorld, and when I skied there was the national barefoot champion was there, a guy named Dave Dotter, who was a freestyle jumper that I used to watch on ESPN. I remember watching him. So what I would do is when I wanted to learn a new trick, I would find the person who did it the best, and then I would just have them teach me. And then it was funny because however I would learn it, like I learned front flips off the ramp from this guy, Dave Dotter, and our front flips looked exactly the same. But so you wanted to, so when it came to health and wellness, it was kind of like, who are the healthiest people? Well, you can't really find a healthy person right now. In fact, if you look at studies, when they say compared to healthy subjects, in a study, that simply means they don't have the condition that's being studied. Because if they're studying, say, diabetes, the group, if they don't have diabetes, they're considered a healthy subject because, when you look at healthy, between people being overweight and depressed and in bad marriage, whatever it is, it's hard to find healthy people. So if we look at the healthiest populations, period, it's the hunter-gatherer tribes in places like New Guinea and Brazil and places like that in the Amazon. And what I mean by that is they don't have diabetes, they don't have obesity, they don't have heart disease. They just found that last year the healthiest hearts that they've ever found in humans is a small tribe along the Amazon River. They have, and the thing about these people is they have the same genes as us. So that's critical because there's a lot of hype about genetics and genes, and our genes haven't changed in a long, long, long time. Yet the chronic illness rate has skyrocketed. So when you graph out how fast chronic illness has gone up, and then you graph out what has happened with genes, the relationship doesn't fit. If genes changed and the chronic illness rate changed at the same rate, we'd say, well, it could be genes. Well, the genes haven't changed, yet the chronic illness rate has gone up dramatically in the last 50, 60, 70 years. So they have the same genes as us, but they have a much healthier population than us. So if we look at that, we say, well, how do they live? How do they eat? How do they move? How do they think? How do they sleep? And if we can mimic some of that, we can get back to the basics. Well, they're basically like wild humans, meaning they eat whole, real foods, and their stress level is not like our stress level. They have stress, but it's the quick burst of stress, like a lion comes into camp. That's quick. Or a flood washes out their camp, or they got to act fast. Our stress is a little different. It's more chronic. It's like this day in, day out. And we're not designed for that long-term chronic stress. But they have a very strong sense of community. They walk about 7 to 10 miles a day, not on a treadmill at a gym, but because they've got to move camp or find food. And it's funny because I always picture like a hunter-gatherer like coming into the city and looking at someone on a treadmill running and just going, well, what are they doing? You know, could you imagine trying to explain to them that we're just trying to get fit? So I also heard a guy that was pretty funny. He said we drive around the parking lot in the gym for 10 minutes to get a spot closest to the door to go in and run on the treadmill. We're so bizarre, right, as a species. So we've gotten away from our genetic kind of required needs as humans, and the result is we've gotten sicker and sicker. And the example I give sometimes is we caught a snapping turtle that I turned over a rock, and there were 6 little snapping turtles because we live on a lake, and they were little baby snapping turtles. My kids wanted to keep them, and so I said, we'll keep one. And so the key with that was how do we keep this turtle as healthy as it can be? Because we know in the wild it'll be as healthy as it can be. So we wanted to create an environment. Were any of you here the last time I spoke? Okay, because I think I might have told the story. I don't want to. I've only got so many stories. But this one kind of sums it up. I've got a couple of them, but this one. So I got a tank that we had, and I put gravel in the bottom, and I filled it up with water. I put some clay and mud from my yard because I didn't want synthetics. I wanted real mud and real grass. And I filled it up with water, and I put some lettuce in there. I put the turtle in there, and then I went in and I Googled how to take care of a snapping turtle. And the first thing it said is don't put gravel in the bottom of the tank because it'll eat it and it'll choke and it'll die. So I ran out there, scooped out all the gravel, went back in. I looked at the next thing and said the water can't be deeper than the height of the turtle because its hind legs have to be able to touch her, it'll drown. Well, I had deep water, so I went in, I drained some of the water out. And then it said, despite what people think, they don't really eat lettuce. And so I did everything wrong. Now what would have happened was if I left that environment the way that it was, that turtle would have gotten sicker and sicker and sicker. Now, with humans, we would say, well, take it to the doctor. Well, a biologist would say, fix the environment. And so, say the turtle started to get like some peeling of its skin. If I took it to, say, a veterinarian, they might say, oh, we'll put this lotion on, and so we could treat the effects of the bad environment, but the cause is the environment. So the only way to make that turtle healthy would be to make a more congruent environment to what it would naturally have in the wild. And ideally, in the wild. Because even a zoo setting, they do pretty good with recreating environments, but those animals can't be as healthy as in the wild. They just can't be. Because the best environment any living organism is going to have is consistent with what it should be. Like a koala bear. A koala bear lives in the rainforest. It requires a certain temperature. It requires 17 to 20 hours of sleep a day. It eats one thing, which is eucalyptus. So if you change any of that, the health of that koala bear starts to go the other way. And so a biologist would say, what's going on in the environment? Whereas the medical people would say, what do we give it to change the symptom? And that's what's happening now. Unless we change our environment, and I don't mean just like our environment like pollution things, I mean like our environment like how we eat, move, and think, we're going to keep, that's the solution. And we know that because we've seen tribes come into city life, and they get fatter, they get sicker in a very rapid rate. They took a group, there's a lady, I think her last name, she's a scientist, Daly. her last name is, she took a group of Australian Aborigine tribe, I think she got 6, 8, or 10 of them to go back. They had been in city life for a while. They all were overweight. They all had heart disease. I think most of them had diabetes. All of their biomarkers were not good because they had been in city life for long enough. So they agreed to go back into the bush and live with their original tribal people for, I think it was 6 to 8, maybe 10 weeks. And when they did that, and they basically lived outside, they ate mostly, at that time of the year, shellfish that they got out of fresh rivers in the ocean. They obviously had to move camp, set up camp, so they were active. When they checked their biomarkers after that, and it wasn't long, it might even have been 6 weeks, it was not long at all, every biomarker was improved. And I think all of them were non-diabetic when they came back out. What's interesting about that is it wasn't because they found the Mayo Clinic in the middle of the bush. They didn't find some magic doctor. They went back to a lifestyle that was congruent with their genetic needs. And so that has been my quest, is studying tribes. And in fact, I looked into actually going to try to live maybe for 2 to 3 to 4 weeks with a tribe, just to really, really immerse myself in that to see. But the one story I read, one guy who did that, he said getting in and out takes like 3 or 4 days just to get to the tribe. And he said the bugs were terrible. And I was like, why would I do that to myself? I can read about them from these other people.
But every tropical disease that exists.
All that stuff, right. And so.
And I don't care what kind you do to your biomarkers, you're still going to get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but and so the word that I've been coming up with lately is the word called merge, meaning we can take what we know about our genetic needs through our ancestors and tribes that are in existence today and merge that with the advancement in technologies and what we have available to us today. Because, we can walk into Heinen's grocery store and have access to over 150 organic fruits, vegetables, herbs, nuts, seeds. That's phenomenal. One of the downsides is we don't have to plan it and do all that stuff, which is good for us because we have to work. But that we have access to that. We have access to gyms at every corner, pretty much. So we've got the resources. So if we can merge it, because I remember my wife said I was talking about these hunter-gatherers. She said, "Listen, if I come home and you're wearing a loincloth one of those days," because I was talking about creating exercises that where you climb trees, where you're using muscles in that's like CrossFit and these other fitness type activities. They're getting more back to basic ballistic movements where you're not just doing curls and push-ups and or even like the dance, like the Zumbas and things, where it's movement. It's good. It's using your body in the way it was designed to be used. We have access to a ton of resources now, and we know what it takes to get well. So that's kind of where I'm at. We're trying to put together a program where we can kind of bring that together for people in a realistic way. But we're also trying to combine it with not just the fitness and health stuff, but how to set goals, and even for kids, relationship building and self-esteem building and improving marriages and financial management, because they said, they said divorce, one of the main reasons of divorce is issues with finances. So, there's a lot to the wellness thing, and you can get pretty carried away, but I think what happens too is you get one expert in one thing and they make it sound like this is the answer. And that's the answer, and I only brought my laptop because I was going to pull up one slide if I could, but I'm not going to. It's the pathways in the body, and I was going to show one where there's an enzyme in our mouth called alpha amylase. And the breakdown of carbohydrates, when we eat carbohydrates, starts in the mouth. And it starts with this enzyme alpha amylase, and it breaks down the sugar and carbohydrates. And so if you ever eat cotton candy, you know how it kind of dissolves in your mouth? That's alpha amylase, breaking down the sugar right away. And so on this chart, it shows alpha amylase and what it does with carbohydrates. So when you expand this chart, it shows all the pathways in the body. And it's so complex. our body is so complex, billions of reactions going on every day. So when we talk about like, here, take this supplement, how is one supplement that's going to affect one pathway? It's bigger than just one thing. And it all works together. So this, it would help if I had the slide, because it's so overwhelming, and it shows all these chemical reactions, and it's millions of pathways. And so that's why you got to be careful with like one thing, like this supplement's the answer, or that supplement, or even this workout, or this diet. So, but it's about whole foods, real movement, dynamic relationships, a sense of purpose, strong community. They're now saying that community and your sense of relationship actually is more important than diet and exercise. And that's pretty important, because a lot of people are kind of like little islands out there. They feel alone. I know moms do. Back in these tribes, everyone comes together to help out to raise the child. And nowadays, they're kind of like little islands, and that's revered. It's a position that's revered, not almost like, oh, you're a stay-home mom, that kind of thing. So that dynamic's changed. The elderly were really revered in the tribe for a couple reasons. One, they had all the knowledge, because they didn't have Google or encyclopedias. They had to go to the elders and say, hey, listen, a flood came through. They had been through 2 or 3 floods, so they knew how to respond to that. The other reason they're revered is because they were healthy, and they're healthy enough to contribute to the tribe. Whereas what's happening now, the elderly population is becoming sicker and sicker, because now they're being looked at as a burden, not an asset to the community. And so that, when people talk about the tribes, one of the biggest questions I get is, well, yeah, but those hunter-gatherer tribes, they only live to be 30 to 40 years old. Well, we have records now that show that more than 20% of them live to be 70 years or older. When they look at the numbers and they come up with numbers of 30 years old, they include deaths of babies. When you take an averages, when you put a 0 in there, it brings that number down pretty fast. But not only did they live to be ripe old age, they lived healthily. And what's interesting is they always had the tribe in mind, because a lot of these tribes, and different tribes do things differently, because I've studied a lot of them. A lot of times when the elderly would get sickly, or when they would know they were becoming a burden, they would wander off, because they didn't want to burden the tribe. Or they would get in a boat and just drift off. It's very interesting. So there are a lot of things that are interesting. I'm not making any recommendations. But anyway, but we've gotten really, really sick, and right now everybody's looking kind of in the wrong direction. They're looking for a new drug, or a new modality, or a new therapy, and that will slow things down, or it may take away a symptom, but it's never going to fix the problem. And we know that now, because we've been doing it for long enough. We consume more drugs than any other country in the world, and yet we're the sickest. I think I just read we're 54th in life expectancy, 54th. We're like in the 30s of overall health. If you look at the most advanced countries, we're way down the list. Out of 12, I think we were like 10 or 11. I mean, we're really, really doing a bad job. My daughter, if you listen to the ads on TV for the drugs, my daughter, I walk in the room, she's 17, she said, Dad, I just heard a commercial for, it was like Centrex or something, a drug called Centrex. She said, it said, don't take Centrex if you're allergic to Centrex. And she goes, what does that even mean? I go, I have no idea. Because how would you know unless you take the drug?
That's funny.
So I'm kind of rambling. You guys have any specific things?
You talked about the pathways, and so, and treating, if we're going to take one thing, if I'm going to take fish oil and I think that's going to treat and make me healthy and make me optimal, and you talked about these pathways, so how would you say, is it optimal living, be able to spin all those plates that stimulate the pathways?
They do, and what's cool is you don't have to understand the pathways, they just do it, because there's things we probably haven't figured out, right, about pathways or certain proteins that we don't know yet, we haven't figured out yet. So, and that's the neat thing about the human being. It wants to be well. Our body is trying to be well. That's all it does all day long. It works 24/7 to be well. That's all it does. We just need to give it what it needs and get rid of what it doesn't. Like a plant. With a plant, its default is flourishing if it gets what it needs and if it doesn't. So if 2 acorns drop and one rolls onto a cement driveway and one rolls into the soil, well, the environment's going to make a big difference. This one's going to die and this one could flourish because it's got what it needs. So we need to give our bodies what it needs and get rid of what it doesn't. But with those pathways, with a plant, you don't have to understand chlorophyll and photosynthesis. You basically, if you have a plant, you can tell a kid, give it water, give it sunlight, and give it nutrients, and give it the right environment, and it'll do what it needs to do. And if it's growing and then it starts to wilt, well, then we know it's missing something. Maybe it's getting too much sun or too little sun, but we want to make sure it's getting what it needs. So when it comes to fish oil, there's 3 ways to kind of look at things that we can put in our body. 1 is medicine, where we're going to treat a condition. 2 is supplements, nutritional supplements or homeopathic remedies that are designed to treat a condition. But then the 3rd category would be taking something to basically create sufficiency where there might be a deficiency. So when I talk about fish oil in our office and somebody says, oh yeah, I heard it can lower my cholesterol. Yes, it can. Or I know it can reduce inflammation because of the omega-3 fats. Yes, but I take fish oil because I know as a human I need a certain amount of omega-3 fats and I'm not getting them. So sure, you can use it if somebody's deficient, and has a condition, they can take it for that condition, which is why when they prescribe fish oil, part of it was they didn't want to lose that chunk of the market, so they came up with prescription fish oil, which I thought was kind of interesting. But they did it for, I think, mostly cholesterol. So it was a treatment, so they're using the supplement, whereas everything we talk about, we try to use it as creating sufficiency where you might be deficient, or creating purity where you're toxic. So if you take fish oil, because we're deficient in omega-3 and you add omega-3 fats, your body gets better, measurable or not. So if someone comes back and says, how do you feel when you take fish oil? I don't feel a difference, but I don't base it off of that. I know I'm not getting enough omega-3 fats based on hunter-gatherers that we know how much they consumed and how much the human body really requires. And so I take it knowing it's a need. I'm deficient in it. We just don't get enough of it. And there's a handful of those that we know. Vitamin D, we know, especially in this part of the country, we're deficient. So vitamin D is what I would consider an essential nutrient around here. Fish oil, for sure, because we don't get enough omega-3 fats. And we get way too many omega-6 fats. So
What's it?
the
What is that
ratio
from?
is so important. What's that?
Where does the O6 fats come from?
Processed foods, a lot of the vegetable oils.
Mhm.
And so we have way too many of those. So the ratio is maybe even more important than the amount. So we could definitely cut out some of the omega-6 fats, but most of us, it's hard to get away from those in today's diet. So instead of cutting them out, which you should do too, but we'll take more omega-3s to keep that ratio higher. So the omega-3 fats, the other one is a whole food multivitamin. I would recommend because we don't get enough nutrients. And the other one we talked about for a long time is probiotics because of the healthy biome, which you're hearing a lot more and more about now. But there's some information coming out now where I'm kind of reevaluating that because there are, I think, 10 million bacterial strains in our gut. And what most people are taking is about 2 to 4 to 6, maybe 8 strains. And we're mega dosing those strains, and now some of the research is showing that that could be a problem. And all the probiotics we're taking come from a cow, not from a human. So, there's a product, Restore, that is a newer product that I'll talk about that on my next talk. That is really exciting because I don't get too excited because you see stuff, people get excited about it, the hype all goes up, and everybody, like probiotic, with probiotics, So you got to be careful in that regard. But there are certain things that we need to supplement, unfortunately, because we're just not able to get them in this day and age. In fact, one of the biggest issues we're hearing more about now is the Roundup, the glyphosate in Roundup, which is the pesticide Monsanto put out, that definitely causes a lot of gut issues. Well, the problem is they just checked, and when they tested it, they found it in 70% of rainwater they tested, and 75% of air they tested.
Oh my goodness.
So now even if you have an organic source, if it's getting rained on, it's probably getting glyphosate on. So we're in a little bit of a tough time in that regard, because we're not getting, we live in a kind of a toxic environment. They tested cord blood of, I think it was 12 babies, and they found over 200 chemicals in the blood of a newborn baby. Some of those chemicals were banned before the mother was even born.
Oh, wow.
Which means that the grandmother passed it to the mother. So I think what we're seeing now, and I don't want to bum everybody out, but is this, because it
Dun,
is,
dun,
but
dun.
we have to really realize where we're at. That there's this kind of bioaccumulation of toxins, and I do believe that that's why we're at a kind of a tipping point, where now that's why we're seeing the explosion of allergies and asthmas and autism and autoimmune. And I always think when I say those things, that's just A. All those started with A. Right? That's just in the A's. But we're seeing we're kind of becoming a weaker species. So we really are working against a tough situation, because we all know people that have done everything right and are healthy but still get sick. So you do the best you can in a tough environment that we're in. But this Restore product helps to mitigate some of the glyphosate issues in the gut. And it is really an exciting product. In fact, I had been taking it because I heard about it and read about it, and it's a liquid. And I was at a functional medicine seminar. The guy had trained some of the Cleveland Clinic functional medicine doctors, top-notch guy. And I was going to grab him at the break and say, listen, tell me about this product, because I never want to find out later I shouldn't be taking it. I want to know, is it legit? And just before the break, he said, hey, before we break, I want to tell you about this product called Restore. It's become a staple, and he went through this whole thing about it. And since then, I've learned more and more about the guy who invented it, Dr. Zach Bush, who's a researcher, super smart guy. But so there are things that we can do to help off. Unfortunately, we have to do nowadays, because I used to think we don't need supplements. We can just do it without. We just can't. I mean, they said, I think that soil used to be 8 feet deep. 8 feet. They said the typical soil now, I think, is around 10 inches to 12 inches. And what happens is they mix in that NPK or something, nitrogen, phosphorus, just enough to replant stuff, and they keep replanting stuff. The nutrients are all gone. The bacteria is all gone. And what the bacteria are responsible for is communicating between cells, and we just don't have that bacteria like we used to get in the soil. And we used to be outside more, which, you would just you'd pick up bacteria in the environment. When kids pick up something off the ground, little babies, put it in their mouth. I mean, that's a natural, they're stimulating their immune system. That's not a bad thing. Even dogs, this Zach Bush said, when you're petting dogs, I mean, there's stuff coming off of that dog, but that does get in our system, and that's not an unhealthy thing. That's actually a healthy thing, because if we look how much we shower and the antibacterial stuff, we've gotten too clean. They're knowing that, they're seeing that now. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention a couple of things, but
Yeah.
I grew up partly on my grandparents' farm, where there was a spring house and there was a bucket, and you brought the water in the bucket, and there was a dipper, and everybody drank out of the same dipper. Everybody washed their hands in the same basin again and again and again. And I have often said that I don't get sick like
Right.
other people, because I've had my minimum daily requirement of E. coli.
You have. I mean, That's great. I mean, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, you never thought of those things. It just,
Well, if you think about in 1900, the causes of death, the leading causes of death were like tuberculosis.
Mhm.
They were infectious disease, but the third, I told my kids the other day, the third was diarrhea. And I said, can you
Yeah.
imagine that?
Yeah.
That'd be a rough way to
yeah,
go.
yeah.
But so, but now it's the heart disease. So we've got all these advances, yet we're dying. We're sicker than we've ever been, but we're dying of different
Right.
stuff. Chronic illness is what we're dying
Yeah.
from.
But, you know, I don't want to go too far with this that I'm going to say either, but I really feel that a lot of our resistance to things, or our ability to heal from things, or our, you know, commitment to wellness and, you know, feeling of it, is a mental state as well.
For
I mean,
sure. For sure.
Okay. well,
Critical.
you're Reinforcing me. But I really think that if you get off on being sick, you know, you're just gonna trip yourself up. And I have a daughter I worry about all the time because she's allergic to this, she's allergic to that, she is sensitive to fragrances, she gets into fights at work because she doesn't want people to wear perfume around her, and da-da-da. And it's just like, you know, I really live better when there's uproar in my life. And I don't eat gluten except when I want it. I do, you know, that kind of thing. But it's just a combative kind of a lifestyle in a way. I mean,
That's
just let it go. Someone told me that they had a dog that looked at them that way, as if, get over yourself.
well, you know, I did a eulogy recently, and I used an example, and I wasn't going to use it because I thought everybody had already heard it. Turns out, no one heard it, even my friends that I thought. But an old Cherokee grandfather was talking to his son or grandson about life, and he said, you know, there are two wolves that come in, and the one is the evil wolf, and it's anger and frustration and bitterness, and he went through a whole list of that. And he said, and the other one is the good wolf, and that's love and compassion and faith and understanding. And the grandson thought for a minute, and he said, well, which wolf wins? And the old Cherokee said, the one you feed. And that is, it actually has hit me harder since I told the story, because we can honor both emotions because they're there, but you have to feed the good wolf. You know, we have that choice. We're the only animal species that has a choice between a stimulus and a response. We have a little gap. It's the ability to choose. No other animal has that. Whereas a car cuts us off on the highway, that's a stimulus. Our response, we have a split second to decide, oh, I feel bad they're in such a hurry, or I'm glad, you know, or anger. You know, we have a tendency to, and what happens, I think, in those situations is eventually something has to hit them hard enough to realize that the little things aren't a big deal. You know what I mean? But those are the toughest things, because you can't change. They're so hard to change. But people are like that, and it causes sickness and disease, and it reduces the quality of life, and that's a big part of health. And some people misunderstand it. They think, oh, just positive attitude. You know, I remember, I think it's Tony Robbins said, you know, if the house is on fire, you know, the house isn't on fire. The house isn't on fire. No, the house is on fire. But what are you going to do about that? So, yeah, those. I mean, and we see people like that. But you know, that's when it comes back to wellness. That's why some of the lifestyle changes. You know, if you take a normally docile, say, raccoon, and you corner it, or you give it the wrong food, you know, it will change its behavior and its personality, and it will become aggressive and angry. So I still believe if we can change the environment, you know, a lot of that stuff can change. So it still comes down to eating, moving, thinking, well, and hopefully that other stuff comes around. We see it every day in our practice. I've had spouses call me up and say, listen, I don't know what you're doing with my husband, but he's like a different person since you've been seeing him, because he has less pain. You know, we're taking care of him. Or, you know, so the brain, exercise. There's a book called Spark by John Ratty, one of the best books on exercise, because everyone knows exercise boosts endorphins, but what it does for the brain, there's something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. They call it miracle grow for the brain. Because we used to think the brain was hardwired, and once it was wired after you were a child, it was done. Well, now we know that you can form new pathways throughout your entire life. What stimulates those pathways is activity and physical activity. So, exercise. They've done this with Troubled Boys Home, where they introduced exercise, and grades go up, physical altercation incidents go down. It's amazing what happens when you give a human being what they need. And it may not just be exercise and nutrition. It may be love. What happens to the kid who for the first time has a coach that sees him in a way, the potential that no one else is seeing him? I just saw something last night. I was flipping through it. It was The Rock, the actor The Rock. And he said he went into the teacher's lounge to use the bathroom because he didn't want to use the bathroom. He was 6'4", 250 pounds. And he's washing his hands, and one of the teachers came in and said, "You're not supposed to be in here." And he said, "I'll leave when I'm done." And he said he walked by, and he could just tell the teacher was fuming. He said the teacher came back to him he said he felt bad that night. He felt sick to his stomach. So he went back, he found the teacher in his classroom, and he said, "Mr. Swanner," or whatever, he said, "I just want to apologize. I treated you disrespectfully, and there was no reason for that." And he put out his hand. He said, the guy shook his hand. He said, "Do me a favor. Come play football for me." He was a football coach. And he said, "I'll play football for you." So he ends up playing football. He's a star. He gets recruited all over the country. And he said that guy, and he had already been arrested. He was a freshman in high school, I think. Was already been arrested once. So that coach did something for him that changed the whole course of his life. So there's a lot of it. It's very complex, but what I always say is stick to things that we know are good, right? So if somebody takes fish oil versus not takes fish oil, it's good. If I sit down with my son and tell him what a great job he did on that project, the outcome is good, right? There's no bad. Or if I compliment one of my staff people, or if I take the stairs instead of the escalator. This isn't always measurable, but I say stick with things that we know are good, measurable or not. So if somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to call my wife on a break and just let her know how appreciative I am of everything she does for me and how great dinner was," I say, does that help the relationship or hinder it? It helps it.
Mm-hmm.
So I say keep doing things that we know are good, even if they're not measurable. Kind of like a bank account. Even if you're putting quarters in a bank account, you put enough over time, you're going to accumulate wealth. And but it may not be noticeable in the beginning. So I always tell people, if it's good, do it, measurable or not. So if you keep doing things that are good for your health, we know some things not everything's going to be a home run. People want that. They're like, "Oh, I tried that supplement, but I felt a little better." Well, it's not magic. They may even say that like we do adjustments in our office. They may say, and I'm like, "You've been here twice. You've had this problem for 15 years, so hang in there." But we know that if we do the right things, and we know we can do the right things and still have bad outcomes. That stinks, but that's part of being human, right? We can run into problems even if we see good things happen to bad people. But doing good things. So the key is, what are good things? And that's where I think studying these hunter-gatherer tribes is critical, because they have some answers because they're like wild humans. We're wild humans living in captivity. Mm-hmm. And anything in captivity goes downhill, and I think we're seeing the long-term effect of that now. And we can call it what we want. I talked to someone today, they said, "I'm trying to figure out if I have Lyme's disease, my immune system's compromised." They don't know. Whatever we call it, it's a word that means diminished health. So one thing that when I'm talking about this wellness program we may try to create, the key will be non-condition specific. Meaning, I don't care what you got. This is for non-condition specific, human specific. I mean, if you're a human being, you're going to benefit from this. And it doesn't matter what you have, you're going to benefit from it. That doesn't mean don't go to the functional medicine doctor specific for a thyroid issue, but this is, I don't want to deal with blood work and this, that, and thyroid up and down. Stick to these things, and we know that you're going to move toward health and away from sickness. And in most cases, it's going to be enough where you're going to probably alleviate most of these conditions. Because in medicine, it's all about naming it. We had a patient, Cleveland Clinic. She was there for, I think, 4 or 5 weeks. They were trying to figure out what headaches. She had headaches. They finally came and they said, we figured it out. She said, what is it? And she said, you have chronic cluster headaches.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, and they were like excited. And she goes, well, now what do I do? And they said, well, we'll keep taking the medicine. So they were very excited to name it, but there's still no real outcome. And they like to name it because if you name it, then they can go to the book and say, what do we do for that? And that's what happens, where then they say, okay, for this, we give this. There's a functional medicine doctor that just went off on his own in Cleveland, phenomenal doctor, and this is what happened with him. He was fed up with, it was so boring. And he had a patient with MS, and he just kind of went off the beaten path and started to dabble with some functional medicine stuff and got phenomenal results. And the other people in the clinic were kind of not real receptive to what he was doing. They would, and the lady was not working, she walks into a neurologist without the cane, tells the neurologist what was going on, and he said, oh, it would have got better on its own anyway. Mm-hmm. Like that kind of thing. So he didn't call, like he said, he didn't call me and ask me, what am I doing? This lady is doing phenomenally better. So there's this weird, in the talk I'm going to do in Twinsburg in probably late March, probably not late March, probably mid-March, is I'm going to delve into how it has gotten that way. Because doctors are super smart, they mean well, they have big hearts, and people always go, well, it's about the money. The frontline doctors aren't making a ton of money, and they really do mean well, but it's a paradigm. They can't see through it, because my thought is, well, how can they not see through the ridiculousness of what's going on? I mean, people are getting sicker. Every day people are coming in and they're sicker, and all they're doing is giving them more, and it's, to me, it's such a ridiculous system that, and they'll look at other things like homeopathy and say, oh, it's not scientific. I'm like, how scientific is what you're doing? It's not scientific. And the results are, we're getting sicker and sicker, and yet we're not changing the model. So about 1.5 years ago, I actually figured out why the doctors don't see through, and I'm going to break it down and show people.
Teaser.
Well, I don't want to do that, but
no,
I
it's
good. But it is.
Yeah.
And for me, because for years I thought, because these doctors, I would have conversations, I would meet with them for lunch. They mean well, but it was almost like if you ever talk to someone who's very racist, and they say something very racist, and you just go,
What?
You really think, they can't see it any other way.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't see it any other way, and I really figured out why, and what people need to know is why, or they need to see it for what it is. They can choose whatever they want, but they have to see it for what it is. Like, I never want to push something on someone. We want to kind of lead them to a model that we feel is the best model. Take it or leave it, I mean, but we want to at least have them have the option. If somebody still wants to just take medicine, take medicine. But we had a guy this week in our office yesterday. I saw him for the first time last week. I saw him yesterday. He has back pain. He said, I'm here because I have this back pain. It's bothering me. I have to sit down. I can't walk as far as I used to. And he said, my brother has had back pain for a long, long time. He would walk around with this bag of pills. He said he's had 9 surgeries. He's absolutely misery. All of the focus was on reducing pain. Because even if he was just happy to be out of pain. But when he's out of pain, it wasn't like he was out golfing or taking walks with his wife. He was sickly. And he was begging for more medicine, because what happens, the medicine stops working, you got to go stronger medicine, more medicine. And he said he killed himself. And so in medicine, their definition of success would be, how's your pain level today? Oh, it's a 4. Wait, well, last time it was a 7, so it's success. Yeah. That's the model. That's the definition. How do you feel? How do you feel? Nothing about, do you like what you do for a living? Are you around encouraging people? Do you feel a sense of purpose? That is wellness. And when people get that, they blossom. So like when you were saying, you said it was your daughter? Mm-hmm. So for her now, and somebody embarks on a little bit more of a wellness lifestyle, now the brain's getting that. Dr. Ratty in that book, Spark, his whole point is, exercise isn't something we do, it's a required nutrient for our brain. And it makes sense with animals, right? Because we know that if I said I have a Labrador Retriever, which we do, if you walked in and I said, you know that, she's been laying in that couch for 4 days, I have not let her out of the house, she hasn't gone for a walk, you'd probably want to call the Humane Society, because that would be considered like animal cruelty. Yet, my kid could sit on the couch for 4 days and people wouldn't think anything of it. The best story I heard, and I use this probably every time I talk, is, somebody giving the dog, potato chips. Don't give the dog potato chips, that'll make the dog sick. Those are for you, honey, It doesn't make sense for the dog, but it makes sense for the human. So we've got a little disconnect. And the disconnect is we don't realize we're animals. That's the problem. We think we're somehow exempt from all the laws of nature that every other animal has to abide by. And the hunter-gatherers are essentially animals. In fact, I was reading a blog one time, and or maybe it was something, it was like, you read TED Talks? Do you ever listen to the TED Talks? Those are great. I mean, they're 18 minutes max. This was TED Talk, some kind of blog. But it was a person saying, we have an obligation to find these tribes and go in and teach them about what we know, and we need to, we owe it to them to show them and I'm thinking, they will run from us. What, you want to be like us? Hey, take our ways, be more like us, depressed, overweight, no, they're doing just fine. They don't need us. In fact, anytime we get involved, we kind of screw things up. I remember they were talking about a tribe where they had these things that would cook, and there'd be smoke in the tents. And so these scientists, or maybe they're missionaries, whatever, they showed them how to vent it out the top, and they installed these little things to say, look at this. Well, what they didn't realize was that smoke killed the mosquitoes. And so now without that, the mosquito population, so their disease rates went way up over the next several years, because they were getting, so there's a reason for why they do lots of things. I remember another story, it was the women had to get the water, and they would walk something like 5 miles each day there to get the water on the way back. Well, they installed the irrigation pipes. These people, the United States came in and we tried to help them out. Well, people were vandalizing them and breaking the pipes, and it kept happening. Turns out it was the women, because they loved the time together on their walks to get the water, and they were away from the men, and they were away from the tribe, and they loved it. So they were breaking because that was part of their deal. So we have to be careful on what we try to instill on other people.
What was the name of that book? Was it Spark?
Spark, yeah. And it's not a new book, but phenomenal information, very easy to read, but it talks about what exercise does for everything from ADD to Parkinson's to everything. They have the nuns were donating their brains to science, and they were studying their brains, and the one nun they talk about in there had full-blown Alzheimer's, severe Alzheimer's, but she never displayed any Alzheimer tendencies because new pathways were growing around the damaged vessels, and they didn't know if that's because lower stress levels or because of continuing to teach into old age because they had a sense of purpose. But so, we have to be careful too on what we buy into, as far as when somebody says say MS. If somebody tells you, if you go to the doctor and they say you have MS, then they'll say, here's what we're going to do, and here's what you can expect. Well, the first thing I would do is say, well, if I don't want that outcome, I probably should do something different, because their outcomes aren't very good. They're just going to, here's the treatment, and here's what we're going to do. Norman Cousins, Dr. Norman Cousins wrote a couple books, really good stuff. His quote, one of my favorite quotes, is accept the verdict, defy the sentence. Meaning, okay, if everything leads to I have MS, I'm not going to say, you can't say I don't have MS if the MRI and everything confirms that, but maybe what you tell me it means to me, that I'll defy the sentence, because the first thing I would do if I had a condition was find somebody with that condition that has beat it or done well with it and find out what they did, because there are a lot of people who have similar conditions but much different outcomes. So I would not buy into this means that, whether it's a disease or anything, you know, just like that, The Rock, you know, he was in an area that probably most people weren't successful coming out of there, and he may have accepted that, but he defy, kind of choose your path. Any other kind of questions, specific stuff?
Well, your little blurb said tips and hacks, for stuff, so you've mentioned the very, like you said, vitamin D, those, is there anything else that you would add to your list of those little things that we can do, little check marks in our mind, whether we are doing them or what's something we want to do?
As humans, we don't do well with taking away. We do better with adding. So if somebody comes in and says, and I've had people say this, like, I don't care what you say, I have a donut every morning, I'm having my donut. Well, we don't say don't have your donut. What we may say is, well, why don't you add the supplements?
Mm-hmm.
Add fish oil, probiotic,
Mm-hmm.
or add vitamin D. Now, and keep your donut. And then hopefully as someone does better and functions better, maybe they have less cravings for the donut. Or if someone's a heavy smoker, the last thing we talk about day one is smoking, because they already know it's bad, they've heard it from everybody else, and that's a stressor if they stop it. So instead, let's start, hey, can we get you out walking for 10 minutes a day? Or to start taking the supplements. So we add, adding is something I would do. Supplements is a no-brainer. Exercise, one of the keys is doing something you love, obviously. And it doesn't have to be crazy. If you look at any study on exercise and its impact on any health outcome, it's not training for a marathon or bodybuilding. It's walking like for 20 to 30 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week. So it's not crazy. And if you look at these hunter-gatherer tribes, that's what they do. They walk. They walk 7 to 10 miles a day. Walking is good, I'd say hidden exercise, doing something that's fun. Like when our kids were little, we would try to have them like set up an obstacle course, and we'd time them or something. So they were exercising that they didn't know it. So you try to make stuff fun. Like if somebody says, I hate running on the treadmill, I'm like, well, you probably should get a different piece of exercise equipment. Because life's too short, it's not supposed to be that way. Or do it with friends, maybe walking with friends. I know people talk about measuring certain things on a scale of 1 to 10. I think it was Tony Robbins said, take anything in your life and measure it from -10 to +10, and give it a rating, and then you can go from there. So if I don't love running, so if I said, where's running on a -10 to +10, I'd say probably like a -2. He said, well, then ask yourself, what would it take to make it a +10? So if I said, well, if I had I like being in the woods and outside, so maybe if I ran trails, that might bump it up to maybe a +3. And maybe a really good playlist on headphones, that might make it a +6. Or if I ran with a buddy or with a friend or somebody, that might make it plus. He said, whatever it is to make it +10, he goes, then just do those things. Yeah. And so I would analyze anything in your life, any area. I know my wife and I had asked her one time, I said, what do you think it would take, our kids were real little at the time, what would it take for us to be a +10? And she was joking, we were driving, she goes, what do you mean, we're not a +10? And we kind of laughed, and she said, you know what, everything's really good. She said, I just think if we had more time with just us, we had a little more time for just us. And so on Friday afternoons, I was done at noon. I was done at noon on Fridays. So we decided to hire a babysitter from 12:30 till like 9:30. And we would go and either bike or hike or do something, and we'd go back to my office, shower quick and go out and grab dinner or catch a movie. So we literally structure that, and so what that would do then, say we were +9, that would then kind of bump it to a +10. Or if in my office, if there were certain things, I feel like my office is a +10 because I love it, I love being there. But if, say it was a +7, and we said, what would make it a +10? Well, I hate billing, why don't we outsource the billing, and maybe if this one employee, maybe if we had a different employee in this position, that would make it a +10. Well, then you do those things. And guess what? It's a +10. So I would analyze any area of the life and figure out what it takes to, because most people get very content with 7 on a 1 to 10. 7 is okay because it's not painful enough to change, but it's not great. So what happens is, and I'll use pain as an example, because we see people every day, what do? They come in and they're a 4 or a 5. I can't move, And so it's interfering with their life enough that they need to take action. But they'll get up to a 7, and it's not bad enough. It's not bad enough anymore, so they're okay with that. Because getting to a 10 takes, but 10 is so much better than a 7. But most people fluctuate at a 7. So you'll hear people, how you doing? Hanging in there. I'm doing okay. Getting by. I mean, that's like a 7. It should be, and 10's hard, so you want to be around 9, 9.5. But it requires ongoing work. But that's, in my mind, again, where wellness is at. That's where I've tried to be around a 10, and not just in one area, but be around a 10, but it requires work. But most people fluctuate around 7 just because it's not painful enough to change. So even their relationships, you know, it's good. It's not until it deteriorates where, you know, all of a sudden the spouse wants to leave. So then they say, oh, and then they buy them flowers and they do all this stuff, you know, to get it. So the key is to probably try to not accept it as a 7 and shoot for the 10, but that requires ongoing work in each area. As far as other tips, gratitude exercise, that's one thing that's doesn't cost anything, takes a minute a day. Pick 3 things and either write it in a journal or say it to yourself either in the morning or at night. 3 things you're grateful for. And that instantly changes your whole physiology. They've done studies and shit with where they show white blood cell counts go up and your immune system changes, so there's a health benefit to that too. But I would do it on my way home from work a lot of times, because I remember when I was growing up, my dad was a great dad, but he'd come home, he'd be tired, he'd be kind of grumpy. It wasn't like we were like, Dad's home. So I didn't want that to be the case, so I would be on my way home, and and my days are usually pretty good and filled up with a lot of good interaction with patients. And so it wasn't like I would just kind of pan out. I'd kind of be driving down the road and I'd kind of take in a little bigger scene, which is like, because we're always doing this, right? So I would first try to just open up, I call it panning out, where we can then see, you know, wow, the sun's setting, look at the trees. And then just, what am I grateful for? And that way I would walk into my house renewed, a better, a little more energy and a better sense. And we've got so much to be grateful for, even in the toughest times. I mean, we've got lots to be grateful for. So it's so easy to do. It costs nothing and it takes no time at all. So, I mean, the 3 key things that I point out are add supplements probably, because that doesn't take any effort and you're not cutting anything out. Exercise on some capacity, but do something you love to do. And don't make it crazy. We blow it up in our head too. We make it such a big thing, you know, we're like, oh, I'm going to have to get my tennis shoes out. I'm going to have to drive to the car, you know, and then we break it out into all this, and then we make it so big, but then if it's something we love, we just do it, you know. So if you do something you love, it's going to be longer lasting and helpful. And outside, I try to be outside. I mean, there's something now the research is showing, being outside, walking in a park, there's an increased benefit than walking on a treadmill. One, the unevenness of the ground, but you're kicking up some of that bacteria in the soil and in the air, and you're taking that in, and it's helping restore your gut biome. I mean, there's more to it than just, and there's a whole thing, and I'll talk about this next time if I talk about the biohack stuff, but the energy, you know. I don't know how, I've been studying wellness my whole life, but in the last probably 6 months, probably 8 months, our cells have a certain amount of energy. Oh, I'm going over, aren't I? We'll talk about it next time. But energy, we pick up energy being outside. The earth gives off a certain amount of energy. We're inside all day, we wear shoes, we're not getting the electrons from the earth, and if explained properly, it doesn't sound woo-woo like it would otherwise, because people roll their eyes, but there's something to be said about sitting on the ground or being barefoot. And if you go to those tribes, they don't wear shoes, and they're outside, they live outside. But they're picking up electrons from the water and the sun and the soil. You know that when you go on trips and you're on the beach and you're in the ocean, you're away from all this stuff, but you're picking up electrons. And there are now some, when I talk about biohacks, there are some devices that help boost the electrons and boost the charge of cells. And I'm having one made for me right now. I looked at everything across the world and they're making it. They sent me a demo of their old unit. And it's kind of funny because you stand on this glass plate and you hold this light bulb and it sends a charge through you, and it's wild. But so I'm waiting for my unit actually to come, and we may put it in our practice. I'll definitely use it at home, but to actually help charge your system, because one, the earth charge is diminishing a little bit, so we don't have the ability to get as much as we did before, plus we're inside all the time, and with all the wireless stuff, I mean, there are a lot of things taking electrons from us, and I know that's you're gonna really going, what the heck's that all about? But it's very, very, very interesting, and one key component that I've really stumbled on in the last probably 6 months that I think is a critical component that'll be part of what we talk about in any wellness program we come up with. But anyway, any other specific questions? That went fast, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You guys are like, no, I feel like I've been here forever.
March 6th, I think.
March 6th. So I'll do the biohacking one, because a lot of these biohackers are talking about being able to live to be 140, 150. I'm not a big fan of that stuff. And they're doing some stuff with some chemicals that there's a reason why they're not doing it 100% right. I mean, my goal isn't to live to be 150 years old. My goal is to live until I can't go to the bathroom by myself, but fully functional. But there's some cool little biohacks out there, and I'll talk about those. Restore was one of the things I would have talked about. That's a new. We do have it in our office, and I do have pamphlets on it. But if you look up Zach Bush, MD, on YouTube, one of the smartest guys I've heard in a long time, and he's got some really good information
Great.
about this Restore. So,
Thank you.
anything else? So, cool.